Go in 10 seconds.
A very good evening to one and all. I am Dr. Soumyadip Chattopadhyay, Associate Professor in Economics, Visva-Bharati University and Senior Fellow, Impact and Policy Research Institute, New Delhi. On behalf of the Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies, IMPRI, New Delhi, and Team IMPRI, I welcome you all to this city conversation. And today, the topic is governance of smart cities or smart governance. Actually, there is the one thing is cities are expected to house almost half of the India's population and contribute 3/4 of India's GDP in the coming decade. And there is no denying that the poor water supply, public sanitation, education, healthcare, and lack of other urban infrastructure combined with the local governance deficits seriously undermine their growth potential as well as making them unlivable. Now these cities are under serious threat from the COVID-19, and clearly the COVID-19 is an urban crisis in the way it has differential impacts on those in the slums and informal settlements. And the Indian cities have set the urban development goals through various programs. So among them, the Smart Cities Mission was launched in 2015 to deliver livability, economic stability, and sustainability to its urban residents through adoption of context-specific solutions supported by robust IT connectivity, digitalization, and improved governance in 100 cities. The central government utilized the Indian Smart City Challenge to select the cities for smart city development based on the objective criteria and the merit of the smart city proposals. And after 2014, the very idea of the smart cities mission experienced a marked shift in focus from greenfield development to brownfield development, and the orientation moved from the construction of 100 new smart cities to making the existing cities smart. And these smart cities are envisioned as exclusive spaces in the form of residential townships, business improvement districts, special economic zones, etc., which would attract global capital investment and also offer high standard of living with amenities and comparable to affluent cities of the developed world. Given the local capacity problem at the city level, the private consultant firms have been engaged for preparing the concept of plan to consolidate the city's future vision and the sustainable revenue model to attract the private participation. And also the central guidelines explicitly uphold the participatory ethos through emphasis on citizen-driven smart city proposals from the beginning. Such participatory imaginary is supposed to be achieved through citizen consultation, including active participation of groups of people such as resident welfare association, taxpayer association, senior citizens, some bureaus association, and so on. But so smart city initiatives now involve a growing number of stakeholders: municipal government, state, consultancies, private corporations, and the actual implementation of the missions are contingent on the very complex interplay between these various groups. And there is one criticism of the smart cities around the world, and so is in India, that these cities are failing to put at the center, to put the people at the center of planning and planning, and people are and these cities are excluding the marginalized groups. And the idea of smart cities using the information technology to improve quality of life and deliver the more efficient and sustainable urban services to the citizens has not played out in practice. But technology and innovation hold great potential to contribute to the sustainable development in the cities if we use them in a right way. We may take the example of Seoul. The city has used its citizens as mayor philosophy for smart cities, an approach which aims to equip the citizens with some real-time access to the information as the mayor. And during the COVID-19, Seoul has gone further than the most cities in making information about the COVID-19 outbreak in the city accessible to all the citizens. But in India also, as of today, I think have 45 cities. They have the operational integrated command and control centers, ICCC, set up under the Smart Cities Mission. And essentially, the Smart Cities project, since the introduction in India, has gathered both applause as well as criticism, and despite the mixed responses, has successfully rewired the very imagination of the city making in India. And the central question is, what smart cities are if they cannot help us live a good, healthy life? So it is important to understand the implementation of the Smart Cities Mission in India and how it transforms and mutates the existing governance structures and the progressive policies. The Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies at IMPRI, along with the IndraStra Global and the City Makers Mission International, has launched a discussion series, The State of Cities, the City Conversation. In this talk series, we plan to engage with experts on urban and regional studies to understand the challenges of urbanization and making the cities sustainable and inclusive. And today evening, we are delighted to have with us Professor Tathagata Chatterji, who is the Professor of Urban Management and Governance at Xavier University, Bhubaneswar. And in his lecture titled Governance of Smart Cities or Smart Governance, Professor Chatterji today plans to analyze the smart city governance paradigm through the lens of the good governance framework. And just before the beginning of his lecture, let me, as a customary procedure, let me just give a brief introduction of Professor Chatterji. Professor Chatterji, as I mentioned, is the Professor of Urban Management and Governance at Xavier University of Bhubaneswar and an Associate Editor, Governance for Frontiers in Sustainable Cities Journal. He had published 2 books, Local Mediation of Global Forces in Transformation of the Urban Fringe and Citadels of Glass, India's New Suburban Landscape. He received the prestigious Jared Alberts Award in 2016 from the International Society for City and Regional Planners for his research on urban governance in India. He has a doctorate in urban planning and governance from the University of Queensland, Australia. So may I now request Professor Chatterji to deliver his talk on governance of smart cities and smart governance. Over to you, Professor Chatterji.
Thank you so much, Professor Chattopadhyay. Really delighted to be here, and thank you very much, Dr. Arjun Kumar, for the invitation. It's really a great opportunity and to connect with you and to a larger audience. So I'll be talking about the governance of smart cities or smart urban governance.
We just lost the slides.
Yes. Yeah, just a minute. Yeah. Now, India, it's really going through a momentous urban change. Although in percentage terms, India's urbanization level, it's still well below many other neighboring countries, for example, China or Indonesia, 2 other very big populous Asian countries. But nevertheless, in absolute number terms, India's urban change that's happening, that's really mind-boggling. Presently, in 2011, India's urban population was about 377 odd million. And now in 2020, as per the projections, the census is due next year. As per the projections of United Nations World Population Prospects, we are already about 35% in 2020. So that makes it about 483 million or so. And by 2030, India's urban population is going to reach the 40% benchmark, or about 606 million population. Now, the percentage terms does not really bring out the full picture. You know, I mean, it is easy to say that we are not substantially urbanized, but the change that's happening, that's really momentous. You know, I mean, this 124 million odd people that would get urbanized between 2020 and 2030, the next 10 years. So that's equivalent to 15 cities the size of Bangalore in scale. So that's really huge in number. But the point is, we are not building 15 new Bangalores. The change that is happening are happening in small incremental manners by many of the small rural areas urbanizing in a creeping manner. That's why, during the 2001 to 2011 census decade, the change, the urbanization that happened, about 1/3 of the urbanization happened through census towns. So the towns which meet the census requirements, but they are not governed as cities. So in India, we have some amount of dichotomy in the urbanization process. There are two big defining phenomenon in India's urbanization process. One is that on the top, we are having large metropolitan regions, which are the true drivers of the growth. As we recently saw in the case of the pandemic lockdown, that when this the second phase of lockdown were announced, almost all the major urban centers were under lockdown. And as Professor Chattopadhyay has just rightly mentioned, is that the COVID-19 pandemic is very much an urban phenomenon. And I think, there was an inadequate understanding of the urbanness of the pandemic, and which kind of created a problem in the decision-making process. The globally, according to United Nations, about 90% of the global pandemic cases are urban. In India also, over 80% of the pandemic are urban. But what is not easily understood, we in India tend to think urban and rural as kind of, two polar opposites. But there are a lot of strong interrelations between urbanization and even the rural economy. Because in India, the urbanization process is driven not so much by the growth in industries. The industry-led industrial revolution was the first trigger behind the first major wave of urbanization that happened in the 18th and 19th century in Europe and America. But in India, and more lately in China, but in India, the urbanization is happening not so much due to industrialization, but rather driven by growth in the service sector on the one hand, which are concentrated in the large metropolitan regions. On the other hand, due to the slowdown of the rural economy, which is pushing large numbers of people from the urban areas to the from the rural areas to the cities. So on the one hand, we have the cities growing, but there are not enough adequate numbers of jobs are being created in the cities, the good jobs. So we have a large informal sector in the cities. And also the urbanization that's happening in India is also qualitatively different from urbanization in China or Indonesia, is that we are not having a population shift. So even though India is urbanizing at a steady rate, but India would continue to remain fairly rural as well. So we have both the urban and the rural moving on simultaneously, but the population is shifting not in a wholesale manner, but rather in piecemeal, small bits and pieces. The rural areas are also transforming. Occupational shifts are happening in the rural areas. So it is a very complicated pattern of urbanization that's unfolding in India. The government in India had, since the 90s, been quite active on the urban front. in 1992, the 74th Amendment Act was enacted, which empowered the city governments. Although the unfolding of the implementation of that act had not been very good, and also hugely uneven. As again we saw in the case of pandemic, that in Kerala that the city governments are empowered, but in most other states the city governments are still very inadequately empowered. The mayors are not the real decision makers of the cities. A major change happened in 2005 when the JNNURM program was launched. It was the first big ticket investment by the central government in the urban sector. The JNNURM reforms sought to, it was a reform which sought to bring in certain changes in the way the cities are functioned. The funds, and initially there were about 63 or 65 cities were identified for funding under JNNURM, but the release of funds were conditional to the state governments devolving certain functions to the cities and also making certain changes in the urban governance systems, do away with some rules and regulations like Land Ceiling Act, Rent Control Act, etc. So the JNNURM program was in vogue for about 10 years, from 2005 to 2015. And in then 2015, with the NDA government coming in power, several new schemes, urban-centric programs were launched. One is the two big ones. One is Amrut, Atal Mission for Urban Rejuvenation and Transformation, which basically carries forward what began under JNNURM. So, although there were some changes in the initiative in JNNURM, the reforms were the primary conditions behind, disbursement of funds. In Amrut, the lending criteria were changed to some extent to incentivize reforms, not to make it a compulsory things. And along with Amrut, the Smart Cities program was launched. As Professor Chattopadhyay has mentioned, it was a very ambitious program which sought to kind of, jumpstart the Indian urban sector by making it the quality of life comparable to the global standard, have world-class cities in India with high-class infrastructure through technology infusion. And now the Smart Cities program is now running in its fifth year. So it is a very good opportunity to take a relook about how the program is going. But if we need to analyze the Smart City program, we need to see it in the backdrop of overall urban governance systems in India. So there are, we talk about three aspects: funds, functions, and functionaries. Indian cities are somewhat deficient in all three aspects: funds, functions, and functionaries. The devolution of the functions stipulated under the 74th Amendment Act is still very patchy and uneven across the country. Some states like Gujarat, Maharashtra, Kerala has been devolved quite a large number of functions, but there are many other states where the devolution has not followed that much. Also, major problems remains about the fundings of the city governments. The cities are facing huge internal revenue deficit. Almost all major cities in India, barring few like Mumbai or Gurgaon, etc., who has got a large property tax base, they are not having adequate internal revenue streams. And external sources of funds are also problematic. The funds do not flow in on time. There are state governments are supposed to disburse funds through state finance commissions, but I mean the process is not very smooth. It is not a timely aspect. So municipal revenue as percentage of GDP in India is just about 1%, whereas other BRICS countries like Brazil or South Africa, where they're in the tune of 6 or 7%. So the cities are devoid in terms of their internal fundings. The third is about the most all cities in India have internal capacity deficits. And as Professor Chattopadhyay mentioned, so that was a reason behind which the government appointed well-known consultants to carry forward the smart cities mission. But I mean, before we come to the Indian smart cities mission, we need to locate the smart cities in a global framework as we try to emulate the other advanced countries. We need to understand how the smart cities are being done in other countries. Broadly speaking, the notion of smart cities at a global scale had followed three broad trajectories. One is a technology focus. The second, there is a human resource focus. The third is a governance focus. So some cities which is focused on technologies, you try to apply smart computing technologies to make critical infrastructure and components for services of the cities. Some cities are trying to focus on human resources. So these are the cities which are essentially targeted for very highly educated population base. For example, Sangdo in South Korea or Masdar city in Abu Dhabi, UAE. So these are the cities which are thought to be smart cities for a very elite kind of audience. In the United States, there is the Princeton, New Jersey area, which is a major education hub. The Randstad area in Netherlands. So these are very human resource driven smart cities. Thirdly, there is a governance focus where the focus of the smart cities mission has been to increase stakeholder engagement and having a user-centric, people-centric focus to use the smart city processes to increase linkages between the people and the city, to reduce the communication gap between the city government and the people. So there are no universally acceptable definitions of smart cities. But what Caraglu says is kind of, a very overarching definition, and I kind of like that. It says that a city which is smart when which does investments in human capital as well as in social capital, which focuses on the traditional transport means of infrastructure transport to modern communication infrastructure to fuel sustainable economic growth as well as high quality of life through wise management of natural resources through participatory governance. So it kind of, ticks all the boxes, and it's a kind of a very overarching definition. But the role of the government in the smart cities, that has been kind of Again, if we look at the governance aspect of the smart cities, then again there had been different notions. So what do we mean by the role of the government of the smart cities? On, on the one hand, it could be a government for a city which is already a smart city. Then the focus is basically on improving the administrative criteria and the policy making processes. Or it is, do we really mean by smart decision making, where innovative decision processes, making processes are emphasized? Or what do we mean by smartening up the administration of the city, where through innovative organizational management, information systems, robust management information systems, focus on the quality improvement of the staff of the city administration. And thirdly, we have a smart urban collaboration. Again, the focus here is on the networks and the participants, and through citizen engagement. So within the smart city governance space also, there are three broad areas of focus on the decision making aspect, the administrative aspect, and the collaboration aspect. Again, when it comes to the unfolding of the smart cities mission, how the process of the smart city missions are driven. There is a big difference from the Indian smart cities with other smart cities in the world. For example, this is New York, where the smart city mission had been driven by the city governments. In most cases, whether in New York or Amsterdam or Vienna or other major smart cities or Barcelona, where the smart city notions had been driven by the city governments. Whereas in India, we have a different process in which the central government had been the driver behind the smart city notion. Here, the smart city process in India has sought to include a top-down vision along with a bottom-up participation. On the one hand, it is a mission which is funded by the central government, so there are certain rules and regulations guided by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. At the same time, there was scope for the cities to define their own priorities. So smart cities globally had been, again, two types. Those are either they're outcome oriented, where there is a technology is seen as enabler for improvement in the quality of life, and there are definite material outputs, betterment of the water supplies, improvement in the traffic flows, better waste collection, etc. Or they could be also focused on process oriented, where there are emphasis is on active citizenship or co-creating cities, as in the case of Barcelona or Medellin in Colombia. So where does this Indian smart cities mission fit in? As I was just mentioning, that the Indian smart cities has a top-down as well as a bottom-up vision. So the funding pattern of the smart cities mission in India, the state government and the central government has a 50-50 share. The smart cities as of now, according to the Ministry website, the Smart Cities website, serves about 25% of the urban population. And the total project cost as of now, it's about 205,000 crores. out of which there are two components: the area-based development, which focuses on about 4% of the city's area, which is basically an urban renewal component. And then there is a pan-city component which focuses on improving the infrastructure of the city through technology focus, which has got about 20% funding. The smart cities brought in a new institutional architecture of governance, the special purpose vehicle, which is constituted under the Companies Act, so which sought to overcome some of the deficiencies in the urban governance system in India. So the SPVs were sought to be professionally managed, bring in a single point responsibility, and which would be being set up under the Companies Act. So they would be better in accessing some of the capital market funds because it is quite well realized that the government nowhere in the world has that kind of money to really improve quality of the entire city. So there is a need to tap municipal bonds and other kinds of capital market funds. Also, those being set up under the Companies Act, the SPVs have allows about 40% private participation, although the majority always remains in the hands of the government. So there could be either the state and they will be in a 50-50 partnership, or the state will be in the private sector in a 40-40-20 or 30-30-40 partnerships. Although until now the private capital infusion in the smart cities is very limited. I mean until now almost all the smart cities are state driven. So in that sense, drawing private capital for smart city development, the existing smart cities had not really materialized that much. But the larger question remains, are our smart cities meeting our priorities? I mean, I will give examples based in Bhubaneswar, the city where I am based in, and Bhubaneswar also happened to be the city which ranked first in the first round of the smart cities. It's the smartest city in that sense. This Bhubaneswar smart city proposal had a lot of inputs from diverse sets of actors within the city, and it was a kind of a people-centric vision of smart city. But is the smart city really meeting the people's aspirations? Every other day, when there is a flooding in the city, waterlogging, the newspaper headlines cry that the smart city is waterlogged. The point is that the smart city funds are not there for the improvement in the basic infrastructure, which is supposed to be taken up under the Amrut scheme. And all smart cities are also Amrut cities. So in that way, there is a convergence between the Amrut and the smart cities. But for the people at large, the question, I mean, they don't go into that intricacies. The question remains, I mean, what are the smart cities being delivering? On the one hand, we have one segment of the city in Bhubaneswar, that is the Janpat corridor, which is being beautified, which is already well-developed part of the city. And the government offices and the government areas, which was the Königsberger planned part of the Bhubaneswar city. But vast parts of the city are not touched by the smart city initiative. Presently, in the case of COVID-19, the smart cities had played definitely a very important role. Many of the integrated command and control centers functioned as the COVID war rooms. So they helped in managing the lockdown process, lockdown rules and regulations, the violations. There was GIS-based tracking and monitoring of the COVID-19 cases. So this is the Varanasi smart city, which had been at the forefront of using GIS tracking mechanism. It is, developed apps to facilitate citizen information about beds availability in different hospitals. So that is definitely a very welcome feature. There had also been very innovative applications of the smart cities, as in the case of Raipur, where delivery of foods and medicines have been controlled through the smart cities command and control center to deliver the foods and medicine to the people, the needy people. So those are definitely good aspects of the smart cities mission. And the lesson that we can learn out of that is that we definitely require a city level platform for integrated data governance, which would facilitate evidence-based decision making at an urban scale, bring data integration between multiple sources and agencies, and also at the same time make the data accessible and focus on wide dissemination. And of course, data then could be a way to engage with the people, citizen engagement. But the point is, how much the budget that the ICC has. Again, I'm focusing here on the Bhubaneswar smart city. 80% of the smart city's budget actually goes for the area-based development, which is a real estate component or urban renewal for a very limited part of the city. For the entire budget of the Bhubaneswar's 4,537 crore smart city budget, only 4 crores are for the command and control center. So I think, as we are now stepping into the 5th year of the smart cities mission, we need to relook at the mission and its priorities. Is the mission, smart cities mission, is it delivering integrated planning? If we look at the planning process, there are different plans in vogue for the city, from the perspective plan, which covers, which is being handled by the Housing and Urban Development Department, to the then the Bhubaneswar Development Authority handles the comprehensive development plan. Then the central mission, the city development plan, was handled by the Development Authority. City sanitation plan was handled by the municipal corporation. The slum-free city plan is being handled by the municipal corporation. The smart city plan is again handled by the smart city SPV. The environmental management plan are again handled by the Odisha Population Control Board. And then there is a disaster management plan, which are handled by the Bhubaneswar Municipal Corporation as well as the State Disaster Management Authority. So the smart city plan is only one component of the overarching planning process of the city. So there are multiplicity of agencies there. On the other hand, we see that there is a hugely fragmented governance system in place, as in the case of Bhubaneswar, and which is kind of true in for many other Indian cities as well. The Bhubaneswar Development Authority is in charge of the planning, whereas water supply is handled by the PHEE, that is a Public Health Engineering Department. Then there is a Smart City Limited, which handles the Smart City Mission, Amrut, PMAY, Swachh-Bharat Mission, National Urban Livelihood Mission. Those funds are being managed by the municipal corporation. the smart cities sought to bring in smart governance, like bringing in the special purpose vehicle. But I think that the special purpose vehicle also has suffers from certain deficits. On firstly, there is an issue of leadership. So who is in charge, really in charge of the city? Is it the mayor who is in charge of the city, or the municipal commissioner is in charge of the city, or the chairman of the development authority is in charge of the city? The smart city has got a CEO in many cities, as in Bhubaneswar and also many other cities. The development authority chairperson and the municipal commissioner are simultaneously handling the smart city SPV. So there is a institutional fragmentation, but at a personal level, there is an integration. So the commissioner of the municipality is wearing two hats, one that of a municipal commissioner, one that of a smart city CEO. Further to that, the CEOs of the smart cities are frequently also transferred. So the municipal commissioners frequently get transferred after 1 year or 2 years. There was a study done by Janagra Foundation, which shows that the municipal commissioners in India, on an average, have a tenure of about 9 to 10 months. So there is a municipal leadership deficit. So then also the question comes, what are the planning priorities? To whom are the smart cities responsible? Are they responsible to the people of the city, or they are responsible to the stakeholders? There are also questions about accountability and transparency. Are they responsible for the shareholders? What happens when there are private participation in the city? Are we going to outsource governance? To whom are the smart cities and who is then in charge of the data? The smart cities are in charge of gathering a huge amount of data. What is then that happens in the case of the data security? So these are certain questions. Of course, there are also issues of equity. In Indian cities, almost 50% of the cities are informal sector. So how does this smart city interface with the urban informal sector? So this is from a book chapter that myself and my colleague Soumyadip Roy wrote. So there are a lot of questions from the angle of smart city from the angle of good governance. I think, that there is a time now to rethink the smart city mission and link it up with the sustainable development goals. The government of India has also signed in that, and the Niti Aayog has been made as the agency in charge of, dovetailing the planning priorities at the state level with the Sustainable Development Goals framework initiated by the United Nations. So India is one of the major countries in that. So within that smart sustainable development goals framework, there is a sustainable cities, the SDG 11, which forms a important component. In fact, it is the only spatial component, whereas the other goals are the sectoral goals. By dovetailing the smart cities mission with the sustainable development goals vision, for each of the sustainable development goals, there are targets, and within this, each of these targets, then there are parameters. So affordable housing, affordable sustainable transportation, urban inclusivity, disaster management, environmental aspects. So I think by dovetailing the smart cities mission with the sustainable development goals vision, we can realign our priorities in a much more better way, which would help in evidence-based planning. So many of those central missions has got convergence with the sustainable development goals. So I think the time is there now to have a more integrated vision for planning at the city level, and the integrated command and control centers could become the repository of the data to monitor progress of planning at a city level, to benchmark progress towards attainment of the sustainable development goals. So as I come towards the end, so we need to move away from a vision of a smart city to a smart city governance. I mean, unless we improve the governance system of the city, we cannot really have a smart city which is effective and efficient, participatory, which is consensus oriented, accountable, transparent, responsive, equitable, and inclusive. Okay, with this, end my lecture, and I'm open to questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Chatterji, for your excellent and very insightful presentation. Yes, you have, first of all, in your presentation, it is very much clear that even the definition of smart cities is very much, it's not clear, very much clear. What do we really understand by the smart cities? And you mentioned about one definition which is overarching in your lecture, that by Karagliu, and that has even one important component of participatory governance. And in fact, also you have mentioned that how the smart city concept is different from the smart city concept which are actually been in practice in the other parts of the world, in the other developed countries. And you also focus on that the smart cities have a focus, technology focus, human resource focus, governance focus. So these are all important. And also during the course of your lecture, I think it is very much evident from your lecture that it is very much important to strengthen the link between the people and the city. So and very rightly, sir, you have pointed out in terms of evaluation of the smart cities, it is very much important to distinguish between the outcome versus the process. That means whether we want to evaluate the smart cities in terms of its outcome, or should we evaluate the smart cities in terms of the processes. Okay, so for example, in the context of Indian smart cities, it's a typical combination of both the top-down approach as well as the bottom-up planning process. Because for example, the SPPs, the way the central government is actually pushing the smart cities proposal and promoting the special purpose vehicle, it signals the top-down approach. But at the same time, if we go by the smart cities mission document, then there has been a specific focus on the bottom-up planning approaches. So this is very much crucial. And also you mentioned that this smart city mission is actually creating a new institutional structure in the context of the Indian cities through the involvement of the professionally managed the special purpose vehicle. But again, the thing is, what are the outcomes? So you actually you also specifically very much very rightly have raised some of the important concerns, and one important concern is really very much appreciated, that are the smart city mission really meeting the people's priorities. And there you mentioned about the funding which are available for the smart cities development. And as per your lecture, it is quite clear that the funds are not available for the basic services. You have shown the picture of Bhubaneswar city, which is completely inundated by the flood and all these things. So it's a serious concern, and money is used to beautify the already developed part of the city. So that is.
I'll make a small interjection here.
Yes,
it is not to, I mean, it is not to say that the funds are not available for the infrastructure. I mean, there are funds available for other infrastructure under different programs, but then it becomes bringing the convergence. Priorities. Yeah.
Yes, no, in fact, there are also, you mentioned about the convergence from Amrut mission, but also there is a possibility of convergence from Visva-Bharati mission, for example.
Of course,
okay, so there are lots of scope for convergence, and at the same time, you also mentioned about some of the positives in the form of the integrated command and control center. You mentioned about the ICC's role in real-time tracking of COVID cases. I think in Varanasi, and also you mentioned about the delivery and of
several other cities. I mean,
several other cities.
Pune had also Pune, Surat had also done very commendable job in that area, and I mean several other command and control centers. My main point is that see, I mean, if we decipher the budget. Again, so what we see that the real smart component in the smart cities, that is a command and control center, where the budget is very small. The other aspects of the smart cities, again, I'll give you even within the pan city component, there is a big budget for a common payment card. I'm giving the example of Bhubaneswar. So common payment card is supposed to be a payment card which would be useful for traveling in different modes of public transport, which is quite common in many Western cities, where you have one card to travel from multiple modes of transport. But when the public transport itself is highly inadequate, where the
utility of the smart cards,
utility of that smart card, it's very less. And then I mean, that is why, you know, I mean, in the case of Bhubaneswar, the uptake of that smart card is very low. I mean, that smart card was rolled out, it is through ICICI Bank, but only a few hundred cards have been applied by people, because when the public transport system itself is not the backbone of the public transport system is weak. So then how do you expect people to use the common card to transfer from one mode to another?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, also within the same thing, you have also mentioned about the multiple organization and the fragmented governance structure, which seriously limit the scope of smart administration and the smart collaboration, which at the same time you mentioned about the two hallmarks of the entire smart cities program, successful smart cities program, which were there in the other developed cities. So it is really creating it's a serious lacunae. Like you also mentioned, like who is in the charge of the cities? It's a very fundamental question. So these are and another important aspect on which I would like to. In fact, we would like to know a lot, like how the smart cities mission interact and integrate with the informal segment of the cities. You mentioned about one of the book chapters which you co-authored. If you, so I think I would request you to please just elaborate.
I can definitely share that with you.
And also, if you please just elaborate on this particular aspect, because this is very much important. Like what is the problem and how this informal segment of the cities, they can be integrated or they can be incorporated within the entire smart cities framework. Like we are talking about the smart governance, but this informal sector, if we go by the traditional definition, they are the unsmart part. So how to integrate the smart version with this unsmart vision?
Yeah. So here I'll give you two examples. Bhubaneswar. I'll give the example based on Bhubaneswar itself. You see, I mean, let's say take the case of street vendors. Now, Bhubaneswar had been one of the better cities in terms of implementing the Street Vendors Act. So the city has demarcated the vending zones and non-vending zones. and given the badges to the vendors, etc. So even when this here, I mean, there was a definite case of interface happened because, you know, in that area where the smart area-based development component of the smart city is, that is the station area, master canteen, it's called in Bhubaneswar, master canteen and the Janpat corridor, which being the main retail street of the city. So there are large numbers of urban informal sector in that area. So initially there was some apprehension that whether there will be large scale evictions and all, but the state government here is a very sensitive state government, and there had been some small issues here and there, but by and large, the process of, I mean, accommodating the informal sector had been done fairly well. But that is not really the case of many other cities. And even in Bhubaneswar, there are, I mean, areas where the Street Vendors Act, I mean, you are supposed to set up ward committees for each ward. So there are some wards where the ward committees are not there. Even if the ward committee is there, the meetings don't happen regularly, or even if they happens, the minutes are not transpired. So, you know, I mean, if it is a really smart city, then you would expect that this information is out in the public domain. You know, I mean, the meetings of the ward committees. Those are the institutional means through which participation of the informal sector happens. But Bhubaneswar had been one of the few cities where this Street Vendors Act have been well implemented, fairly well implemented, not 100%, but I mean fairly well implemented. But there are several other cities where there had been huge problems with the informal sector. As again, we saw in the case of pandemic, some of the so-called smart cities faced a lot of problems with the urban informal sector. So what then becomes the definition of a smart city? Is it smartness only in physical infrastructure sense, or it is in people sense? So I think these are some of the larger questions we need to engage upon. And also, in the name of engagement with the informal sector, there is a, you know, I mean, there is now a move to rehabilitate a lot of people, the slum dwellers, through state-led affordable housing programs. But we studied some of these programs, and we found that almost in no cases that the issue of livelihood is not taken into account. So because there is very close link between shelter and livelihood. So it is, I mean, the people are in the informal sector because, you know, I mean, they're not because, you know, I mean, they're looking for shelter, but because, you know, primarily they have a livelihood link with that area. And so how does, and also there would be future questions. Time may not be as yet ripe, because the private participation has not yet happened. If and when there would be private participation in the area-based development component, how that would interface with the vendors in that area. So that again remains a question.
Okay, just related to this, because after that I will request Dr. Arjun Kumar to make some observation. Also, we have some of the interesting questions that we already have here. But before moving to the questions, I have another question, or I want to know from you. Like you talked about the private sector participation, and it is not the new thing, because even after the liberalization in 1990s, there is a lot of hue and cry over the private sector participation. Government is always promoting well, or they want to facilitate or promote the private sector participation, especially in the urban sector. But even under the smart cities mission, if we see the funding component, the proportion of funding which is actually coming from the private sector, they are not that much. So what are the real lacuna that you think actually hindering these entering of these or these entry of these private sectors within the entire smart city framework? So what are the major lacunas that these cities have?
See, I mean, that is because, the smart cities, one, there is a huge global slowdown. So the real estate sector, by and large, is not doing well. And the smart cities, that the main opportunity for participation is the area-based development component. So unless the real estate sector performs well, the fund flow into the ABD component would be less. There could be also participation by the other sectors, for example, the IT or the software companies. So about the data infrastructure. But so far, we have not seen. I think, there is a kind of wariness because, to engage with the city, because the city is, it's kind of this city governance in India is seen as messy. So the private participation would happen in when there is some area which is very well bundled. Say, for example, distribution of power, which happened in many cities, like in Calcutta there is CAC, which is there historically, but in Delhi it has been privatized. But under the smart city scheme of the things, the scope for that aspect remains less. So because the smart city is the smart city mission per se, or the smart city company limited, XYZ city smart city company limited, it is not in charge of the distribution of any of the basic infrastructure. It is there only for metering. So this interface needs to be sorted out. So unless, there is a, the distribution and the metering are not by the same agency, then how do you, what are the battery giants? What are the responsibilities? Where does the responsibility of the distributing agency ends, and where does the responsibility of the smart city agency begins? So these interfaces needs to be sorted out, and except the Pune. I went through some of the detailed documents of the company, smart city company setting up the documents, except for the Pune smart city company. Also, I have not studied 100 smart city documents, but some of the main smart cities, the bigger ones, the top 20 ones. So except for Pune, I did not really find in other places that the interface between the different city agencies and the smart city have been well articulated.
Okay.
So that is why, what we are seeing is kind of a institutional fragmentation, but that institutional fragmentation is being sought to be managed through a personal integration by putting the same person in charge of both the agencies. So the same person is wearing two hats. So that also again is a questionable development. So if there is a conflict between, I might be a little bit more pessimistic, but if there is a conflict of interest between the municipal government and the smart city, so who arbitrates in that?
So let me now take some of the questions which have been posted here.
Until then, should I?
Yes, please.
Questions? Yes.
Okay, please.
Right. Sir, as you rightly mentioned that so you have studied some of the DPRs or the smart cities plan the one which was submitted. Is it coming on the screen? So
Yes.
this is one study
Mhm.
which we did and specifically analyzed Bhubaneswar,
Yeah.
and wherein ward-wise we took the
Mhm.
socio-economic and demographic details and saw that which wards should be taken up from the point of view of informality and various things. And we have looked into that. So my questions are very, I would say, precise. Rightly, sir, you are mentioning that, sorry, that there should be integration, and the IC3, which we call it Integrated Command Control Center, in short. uh, there has been some push, and most of our smart cities are, I would say, supply side coming out from the government, because the PPP is really not working what
Mhm.
SPVs we envisaged for. So specifically, so Bhubaneswar has been earlier also ranked the top, in the smart city. So we were really looking into it. Many of the other parastatals are doing really great in Odisha, I would say. So much so that, be it street vendor, or be it urban housing, or be
Mhm.
it rental housing, many success stories have come from Bhubaneswar. And Odisha also is not very, I would say, developed among the developed states in the country. So what is leading it, and how this, I would say, bureaucratic cities which we have can be pushed to attain some of the ease of living agenda. Other than that, sir, you really mentioned about the role of other parastatals and coordinating agencies to look into all these aspects of service delivery, especially to the informal economy, or say those engaged in unorganized sector, informal sector. Sir, how do you envisage that, given the condition of the smart cities mission now, which is not really pushing, and what Odisha is envisaging to look into this populace, which is sometimes called illegal, sometimes not welcomed in this migration and COVID times. Sir, how do you foresee our cities, especially focusing upon this agenda? I really had a chance to visit with many professors in US and other countries of the world to look into their smart cities program. US
Mhm.
has something called smart cities US America. Then we have smart cities Europe. Then we have smart cities also Australia councils.
Mhm.
Many of them. So a lot of things there. The investment is really into automation or something, very high tech tech thing, and they are investing to the tune of, I would say, 10, 20, 30 years.
Mhm.
So their projects and their investment is entirely of different nature, whereas we are still struggling for the issues of land, for the issues of entitlement. So, sir, how do you see that we should move ahead? And perhaps, sir, you can answer these, or Soumyadip sir, do you want to collect all the questions so that Professor Chatterji can answer, or sir, howsoever you want to go?
I think maybe these are fairly robust questions. So I think it would be better to answer these, and then I can take more questions. Um, Coming to the issue of informal sector, Odisha, see, again, it kind of depends on the political culture of the state, or rather the main political leadership of the state. And in Odisha, in that sense, has been quite fortunate because it has a welfare-oriented political culture. Many of the development initiatives in Odisha um, had sought to learn from Kerala or other good Indian states. So in fact, in terms of accommodating the informal sector, you might be knowing that, Odisha has really taken a very momentous, major steps. One is that the Jaga Mission, Odisha has launched a program which is the largest program of its kind to give land title to the urban informal sector. And that program is being rolled out all over the state. It has been rolled out to all the major ELBs except the municipal corporations. So except Bhubaneswar or I mean 2-3 bigger cities, it is being rolled out in about 105 or 6 cities, and now the next phase it is going to be rolled out to the to Bhubaneswar and the Cuttack and the other bigger cities. So that is one program which I would say is a really smart program. How the program have been done, I mean, so you see, I mean, giving land titles, land is one of the most contentious issue in India. And almost, I mean, so many court cases are there which are linked to land issues. So here again, the land question was managed very well, and that was through smart technology. So what was done was a state level agency. At a state level, there was one agency was assigned the task of mapping the informal settlements through what is that? Through aerial survey, through drone survey, and then local NGOs were given the task. I mean, and Tata Trusts were the agency which handled the process. Local NGOs, local community organizations were given the task of verifying the data on the ground. So it is at the same time a technology-driven process as well as a backed up by on-the-ground verification. So some of our students had also been working in this Jaga mission. So that has been a very, very people-friendly move. Again, Odisha had been one of the pioneers in implementing the Street Vendors Act. And again, when this pandemic happened, so it was the first state again to start a state-level livelihood support program for the urban informal sector. So the political leadership in the state had been very focused upon, and it's a development-oriented political leadership, which focused on improving the lot of the urban informal sector. But when it comes to implementing the process, that has been done by the state bureaucratic apparatus. Unlike Kerala, where the mayors are empowered. So in Odisha, the municipal commissioner is really the key person in the urban local body. So the state housing and urban development department had been run by a very efficient secretary, Mr. Mati Vatanan, and so he had been the main anchor behind, many of this development oriented programs. What was the other question that was about? One was about,
it was about the kind of project smart cities is taking.
Yeah.
Perhaps new field, the green field or the brown field. How we are envisaging. Yes.
So smart city, in India also we had the experience of developing greenfield smart cities. One is the gift city in Ahmedabad, in Dholera again in Gujarat. I think, those were kind of the initial visions which might have been there behind setting up 100 smart cities mission. But in India, getting land for such big greenfield cities are problematic. One such example is the case of Amaravati, where this the land issue had been contentious. Although in Amaravati, the land acquisition was not done by the applying the Land Acquisition Act, but under the land pooling process. But for these kind of greenfield cities would always take a long time. And given the economic scenario, so there is a huge amount of uncertainty is that how much time it would take for the greenfield cities to really fructify. In China, had been a lot of, this greenfield urban development. While those greenfield urban development had been a trigger behind China's phenomenal economic growth, but also at the same time, a lot of ghost infrastructure were built. So in India, where the land is we don't have that much liberty with the land. Land is a premium in India. There is a huge land scarcity. So we need to be doubly cautious about building greenfield smart cities. But there is always huge opportunity to improve upon the existing smart cities through technology infusion. So in my view, the smart cities vision really need to focus upon the pan city component and more specifically on the command and control center rather than on the area-based development, which can be left to the private sector to develop. Which is which is nothing but a urban renewal or real estate development. So the state can focus upon improving public spaces, but building the building part of it could be left to private sector. So that can be an opportunity for public-private partnership in the area-based development component. And the Smart City Act allows for that. But I think, if we really want our cities to be smart, we need to redefine what outcome we really want our cities to come out. So we need to have an evidence-based framework that at the end of 5 years, how much improvement we expect in terms of delivery of water, how much improvement we expect in garbage collection, and how much we can improve upon in affordable housing. So these are areas which cuts across many domains. So to monitor these developments, as the Niti Aayog has been empowered as the coordinating agency for the sustainable development goals by the state governments. So the Niti Aayog has got a dashboard for monitoring. The smart city command and control centers could be similarly empowered to monitor the city's environmental progress, the city's progress in delivering affordable housing, delivering water metering, or collection of taxes. So all these, the ICCs could really become the data or the knowledge hub for the city and not be limited to a smart city limited, but rather be the nodal agency for data dissemination for the urban governance as a whole. Then there is, of course, a bigger question of about, who is in charge of the city. I think that would require a greater political consensus to take effect. And I'm of the view that, the 74th Act itself also requires to be revisited because we really cannot, we have cities of various sizes and capabilities. We really cannot have a one-size-fits-all kind of a solution. So the bigger cities, the capital cities, those need to be empowered to a different degree compared to tier 3, tier 4 cities who perhaps require much more handholding.
Thank you, Professor Chatterjee. One thing really I also wanted to ask that in terms of cities, the push of cities from the government of India, what has been envisaged that this Delhi to Mumbai corridor, a lot of cities would come up. Similarly, Mumbai to Bangalore, Bangalore to Chennai, Amritsar to Kolkata.
BMIC corridors, yes.
Yes. But so why nothing from, our Kolkata to Hyderabad or let us say Chennai? Why the eastern side? And I would say historically, this has been our industrial belt. So, in your view, is it the Naxalite problem, or why that part is missing? Because Bhubaneswar is really leading it in terms of smart cities. So you can choose to also incorporate this in the interest of time. Soumyadip said, would you like to have? You can collect all the questions.
Yes,
so
about the
that
questions which have been asked. Yes,
yes,
actually,
yes, briefly.
I think some of the aspects Professor Chatterji has already touched. I think you have already answered some of the questions which are there in the Q&A box. But one question is what I think it seems to be interesting, that there is a lot of discussion on the Smart City 2.0 of late. Okay, so the question is, have we succeeded in Smart City 1.0 that we can have the vision of a 2.0? And if that is the case, do our union, state and local government have the necessary funds? And if yes, so how have they been utilized in the first place? So, so do we really need a new Smart City 2.0?
Well, I think there is a move. I mean, I heard so. I mean, I was consulted by one of the agencies who are doing an audit of the. I mean, they have been asked to do an audit of the all urban development related schemes. I will not name the agency or the schemes for which was there, but 5 major urban development schemes: Smart City, PMAY, Amrut, and Swachh Bharat Mission and National Urban Livelihood Mission. So there is a, I mean, and that the government had done also in the case of JNN and URM earlier. So there was an audit about, I mean, the schemes and how the schemes are performing, what are the lacuna, what do we learn. So whether the, and a report is being prepared on that round. And so whether those would be acted upon or not, that remains a difficult question that needs to be addressed at a political level. Now, when it comes to whether we need Smart City 2.0, I would definitely say that yes, definitely we require a Smart City 2.0, but what contours and parameters of that would take, I think, I mean, there is a scope for a lot of, I mean, deliberation on that. And I'm of the, it is my, again, very personal view that the SPV mode, which might work very well when you set up an airport or any other kind of a standalone infrastructure might work. But when it comes to the city as a whole, the need for a special purpose vehicle as a parallel government institution, that remains, I mean, questionable to me. Do we really gaining anything by doing that, except, you know, I mean, maybe facilitating some of the contracts? But again, I mean, there are a whole lot of, I mean, questions about the issues of transparency and also urban data governance in case of, so I think, you know, I mean, if we go for a Smart City 2.0, I think the first area which we should look for is that to align the Smart City vision with more tangible outcomes. I mean, I mentioned that the SDG framework as one such tangible way of doing it, because the government of India has already accepted the SDG framework. That is, I mean, we need to realign with the smart cities to make them more people friendly and make the governance processes more transparent and equitable. So I think that should be the priority of the Smart City 2.0. When it comes to about setting up about new infrastructure, new greenfield smart cities, so I think, I mean, given the unstable economic scenario, that remains problematic. And now I come back to Dr. Kumar's point about Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor or Bangalore-Mumbai Industrial Corridor. So, I mean, see, there are several angles to it. I mean, even though the project was set up very long time back, I mean, by now it's over 10 years. I don't think, I mean, not much really happened on the ground. Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor, the project is also lagging behind because the objective in the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor was to create manufacturing zones along high-speed railway corridor. But manufacturing sector in India as such has not really been picking up. So the corridor would be finding takers. Now coming to the question of, I mean, why those are in one area, why not in the other parts of the city? I think, I mean, that answer is fairly obvious because, I mean, the western and the southern states in India had been economically far more dynamic compared to Bengal or Odisha or the eastern states. So I think, I mean, they had been much more economically dynamic, and their urbanization level itself has been much higher compared to the urbanization level of this eastern states. But on the other hand, we already have the golden quadrilateral, which is already in place. But in both Bengal and Odisha, there had been major conflicts regarding land acquisition. In Bengal, there had been the Singhugram incidents. In Odisha, there had been this POSCO incident. So even if, I mean, such industrial corridors are to be set up, then land acquisition will become problematic. Most recently, we saw as in the case of Andhra. So, I mean, one government was, I mean, going for Amaravati as the capital. The government changed, and then there is a rethink, and now they are going for a 3 capital process. So here again, I mean, that brings up the question of the smart cities. So smart city, I mean, at the end of the day, the smart city is nothing but a central government mission. So it does not have, the smart city plan does not have a statutory backing. It is not a plan which is like the master plan. It does not, I mean, so the smart city mission is also in that sense. There could be, I mean, the change in priorities by the government. So, I mean, that is a larger question. So then what happens then to the fate of the SPVs? So there are, I mean, this is also a point, in which we raised in our book. I mean, so there are, from governance angle, we need to relook at the smart cities mission in a much more closer manner.
We have also with us Sunidhi Agarwal. She is a researcher with IMPRI and she is joining from Jamshedpur. So Sunidhi, you may please ask your question, or if you have any comments on this Professor Chatterji's lecture.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor Chatterji, for such an informative session. I really like the points put forth by you. So there's one question which is, SCM was also meant to invite foreign investment, but these have been restricted to only a few developed states. Poorer states having smart cities in itself is a contradiction. They continue to tag further increasing regional or interstate inequalities. Do we really want to progress exclusively in this aspect?
Well, I think it's a very value-laden question. I would say that when it comes to Odisha being a prime example of a state which is a rural state with only 17% urbanization level, the same is the case of the neighboring states like Chhattisgarh or Jharkhand. So do we really require a smart city in here or not? My point would be we definitely need to speed up urbanization because urbanization is a way of to create employment opportunities for non-agriculture sector. But what form and structure that urbanization would take place? I would suggest that we definitely require a state-level urban strategy. In fact, that is one of the other point which I had been making is that Sustainable Development Goals framework initiated by the UN. A parallel move along with that is the national urban. New urban agenda. So the new urban agenda requires the national government and the state governments, also national governments of each country to frame an urban policy. But for a very complicated state country like India, where it is not possible for the national urban agenda to truly articulate an implementable urban policy. It has to be because the state level characteristics vary very widely from Bihar to Kerala to from Mizoram to Maharashtra. There are huge diversity. So we need to have a state level urbanization policy, urban policy to guide what should be the urban strategy for that particular state. My point is that for far too long we had sought to keep urban and the rural at two polar opposites, but we need to recognize also that there is a strong link between agriculture and urbanization, and agriculture had been a trigger behind urbanization. Whether we accept it or not, many places in India, the change that is happening is happening in an in situ manner, in a spontaneous manner. So we need to bring those changes under a structured and a planning mechanism. Now coming to the question of whether to have a smart city or not, I would definitely say we require smart city. We definitely require more technology infusion in the city. But when it comes to the smart city as envisaged under the smart city mission, I think that the mission requires a rethink. But as a concept, we definitely require more smart city. We definitely require more application of smart technology to improve the quality of life in the cities. But what is the smartness? That needs to be redefined.
So, well, thank you, Professor Chatterji, for all your comments and spending time with us. Well, I also do agree with you that the real smartness lies in making the cities livable for the entire population, not for a section of the city. And actually, I'm just thinking of Amartya Sen was once described India as a place where the islands of California exist amidst a sea of sub-Saharan Africa. So what the smart cities is doing, this mission has done, it actually created some smart pockets, not the smart cities in the Indian context. And if we really want to mitigate these inequities which is arising out of it, we really need to meet, as you rightly pointed out, we need to rethink the entire smart cities mission. We need to realign the smart cities with maybe with the broad objective of, if we follow the outcome based evaluation of the smart cities mission, it is important to realign the smart cities objectives and priorities with that of the sustainable development goals. You also touched upon all these points during your presentation. So India obviously needs an urban agenda which is much more wide ranging. It's sustainable and locally driven than the one which is centered only on the new smart cities. Thank you very much for being with us, Professor Chatterji, and for spending and for delivering such an insightful lecture. We will look forward to you for some further future research collaboration with you, as well as in some of our future events also, because under this city conversation series, we are going to have a series of experts who are going to come up over the next 2 months, at least up to, I think, if I'm correct, I think we are full up to December end. So almost, and also we will be continuing with the city conversation talk. So we hope to have more often with you. And if Arjun, if you have any closing remark.
No, I was saying that perhaps the students there can join the event whenever, and sir can also join us for our next conversation to discuss, and ask questions from all the experts. And thank you so much and I congratulate once again, and thank you for putting across such a very elaborate topic and sharing your things with us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kumar and Professor Chattopadhyay. It's really a pleasure to interact on such an important issue. And I mean, it is really a very interesting thing. And as Professor Chattopadhyay, you mentioned about Amartya Sen's comment. So let me also end with another Amartya Sen's comment. So he said, you know, I mean, in India, what is true of about one thing in India, its opposite is also true. So, and I mean, nowhere do we see these contradictions in India more so than in the Indian cities. And no wonder that the smart city has mission has, you know, I mean, brought out in the open these contradictions. So, I thank you again, you know, and I'll be very happy to engage again in future. Dr. Kumar, thanks a lot for inviting, and Dr. Chattopadhyay for very informative and illustrative introduction and conclusion.
Thank you, Professor Chatterji.
Have a nice day.
Have a nice day. And also, I would like, on behalf of the team IMPRI, I'd like to thank all the participants who actually have attended this city conversation topic. So please stay tuned for more such conversations. Thank you. Have a nice day. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.